Hello and welcome to Whimsically Wicked, a reading duet. My name is Haley and I am the whimsical half.
And my name is Daria, and I'm the wicked half.
Welcome to another episode of Get Swapped.
Yeah, and this one I didn't torture you during.
You didn't.
I picked something I knew you'd like.
You really did, and you delivered.
I did. I know, I'm really proud of myself for this one.
Yeah, I literally just finished it this morning, but I had so much fun with it. I will be continuing the series.
I finally re-listened to it this morning for like the 100th time.
Yeah, my goodness. It's so good.
I did make myself stop though at this book so I knew firmly where it ended to make sure that
Mhm.
I didn't spoil it because like for me this series lives in its entirety in my brain because
Most series do for me.
like I've read it and listened to it so many times now that I'm just like, yeah, this is the thing that happens and I'm like, no, can't do that today.
Yeah. Well, and the way that this one went to, we'll talk about it a little bit more. It wasn't an ending that I feel like as I go through more books that I'm going to be able to definitively say that it ended here.
Yeah, I would hazard a guess because I actually looked at the publishing timeline on these, and they're one of those series that the author released like 3 months apart. So I
Oh,
would assume that they were all written as one really, really big book and then broken into pieces for publishing.
which I have some things to say on that, but we'll get there.
Okay, that'd
Yeah.
be interesting because the other book I bought you that year for your birthday is the same style.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
Interesting. I'm excited to read that one too.
yeah, that's a Michael J. Sullivan book, which she's never read from him before, and he's like one of the kings of fantasy. So good.
I'm excited.
Well, this book is Fantasy of Frost by Kelly St. Clair. It is, I guess you could call it YA. I would lean more towards NA, like new adult.
Me too.
In its content, in its writing style, all of that. I like it's tagged as YA and new adult. I would say new adult.
And it's so funny, just with the theme of me going into blind with books, I had no idea what I was getting into. I didn't know if it was romance, I didn't know if it was YA or full adult. And you might have told me before. I just completely blank slated and was like, all right, we're going into it. So halfway through, I was like, is this YA? Is this new adult? I don't really know. Is it romance? Is it not? I have no idea. But that's just the way that I like to consume books. If you're watching on our YouTube live stream, she has them. Can you see them in here?
No, they're up too high.
Let's get them so that because they're gorgeous
They
covers.
are gorgeous covers. Haley's currently scaling up my bookshelves to get them. I hunted on the internet for like 6 months to get all these covers and had to import half of these from the UK because they're out of print. And I have all of the hardcover versions of the first editions of these books. There's different editions available in the world, but they're gorgeous. Highly
These ones are so
recommend.
pretty. So, the one that I read for this podcast episode is Fantasy of Frost. Again, if you are on the live stream, you can see them. Um, Fantasy of Flight is number two, and then you have Fantasy of Fire and Fantasy of Freedom. And they're all kind of like matte covers. They're so smooth.
They have good hand feel on them. The art on them is really cool. I like that there's like not too much going on. They're just so pretty.
They're gorgeous. So I have the copy of the hardcover that Daria got me for my birthday last year. But I ended up reading it on my Kindle. It is on Kindle Unlimited.
It is.
And then I also tagged that with the audiobook just because I was a little bit strapped for time this last week. And I did a little bit of both, which I actually really liked. But it is on Kindle Unlimited if you are interested in getting into the series. I don't know if the whole series is there, but definitely the first book.
Whole thing's on Kindle Limited and the whole thing is on Audible because I own both versions.
Amazing.
And actually, for an audiobook narration from, think this was done like 5 or 6 years ago, and not being duet or dual, like it's just the single female narrator, really well done. I actually like the audiobook for this.
Yeah, the first time I really acknowledged that it was a young adult was with the audiobook because I think it was very done young adult esque,
Yeah.
but it literally is a young adult novel, so that makes sense. As always, the first part of this episode is going to be spoiler free. We're going to talk a little bit just about like general vibes, general world building that happens in these novels, and then we'll go into spoilers afterwards if you do need to stop and come back after you've read it.
Hopefully, our spoiler free version prompts you to read this because I think more people should. It's really good.
Yeah.
other, and one's hot and one's cold, and the only way they can survive is by coexisting because the hot planet or disk takes some of the cold and makes that portion of it livable, and the cold one does the same with the hot, and that makes that portion of it livable. And it's really a political one at the end of the day, too, like a political book where tensions are high between the two worlds. They have very different cultures, which is going to be one of the tropes we talk about in this book because it's one of my favorites. And they're just designed to fail as far as
Yeah.
it goes. Like they're just in a cycle of like tentative peace, war, really strained peace, war. And at the end of the day, they have to coexist because they can't live without each other
Yeah.
in a lot of ways. And what we do is we follow our female main character, and it's her only point of view through the whole series. Her name is Olena. She finds herself being taken from her home, which is the hot world where she is the princess, and moved over to the cold one as a political prisoner. And she has to navigate a very different culture, a very different court, and also a very different world because she's used to being hot all the time and she's got to cope with like that weather and temperature change. And then she also needs to kind of do a little murder mystery while she's at it and figure out who killed somebody.
Yeah. Um, a little bit more on the world because that is by far my favorite part of this so
Right?
far. Is so these two discs. There's two different worlds. Like she said, one is hot. It's called Salati,
Solaris.
Solaris, and the other one is called Glacium, and that is the cold world. And each of them, we know a little bit more about Solaris right now, just
Yeah.
because that is where she was from, and that's where this book uh, started to take place in. It is split up into six sectors, and you live, say you're in the first sector, that is the one that is closest to Glacium, and that is where primarily the royal family will live in that first sector. It will take about 6 months to get into the second sector. It'll take another 6 months to get into the third sector, and so each sector represents 6 months.
Yep.
The sectors don't move. That is how they basically like you know
Yeah, there's like
geographically point where they're
it's
sitting.
like time zones.
Yeah, exactly. um but they do, so the world moves, and it's a 6 month for each sector, so it takes 3 years to get around the whole revolution they call. The fourth sector is unlivable, basically. It's kind of this like hell, I guess, is kind of how they compare it.
Yeah, everything's on fire. It's too hot for anything alive to survive. All of their vegetation and stuff is like adapted to going through bouts of like extreme heat and then regrowth.
Yeah, so the royal family in the third sector, they prepare, they pack up, and they move to another place, which is in the first sector again, that's on the other half of the world that they can live in. And then in the fifth sector, they send a select group of people out there to the fifth, so that they can basically rebuild everything to make it livable. They take all of their food and storage out of their like their barracks, I guess, that they put them in, type thing, by the
Yeah.
sounds of it. And then in the sixth one is when they move back, and then they stay there until the third again. I thought that that was such a cool thing.
I world building in this one is so unique and one of my favorite things. And it's the same concept for Glacium. It's just the opposite. It gets too
Mm-hmm.
cold in
Yeah.
their fifth sector for them to survive. So they have to make that migration, and they do the same thing where they send people to go like prep everything for them. And it's just like this constant cycle where their lives revolve around what is for all intents and purposes seasons,
Yeah.
but stagnant seasons. Like they're like in their own spots constantly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I love the world building for this one. I found it super unique and super interesting in the way that it was like instead of being like round planets or anything, like they're discs, and then they're connected by this thing called the Escarla, which is basically like Avatar style floating platforms that you have to go across via like ladders and ropes and bridges to get between the two worlds. And I
Yeah.
think that journey takes
A
6 weeks,
while.
something like that. It was between 3 and 6 weeks to get across it with a map.
Yes. Or with experienced adventurers. Yeah, people who've done it a lot. And then the political side that you were referring to, there is a lot of negotiations that happen. And it happens once a revolution, so the 3 years, but those negotiations last a whole year.
Hmm.
So they will send people from Glacium over to Solaris, or vice versa, to have negotiations, to try and make peace, because the two worlds are very reliant on each other, except for they also hate each other. They're so different in culture and in the way that they speak. And this is something that I find really interesting is that it's very contradicting because Solaris is the prim and proper. They don't talk about sex. They don't just burst out into fights. The women, they're not allowed to
No
train.
emotion.
No emotion. And the cold is the one where it's like free and sexy and they fight all the time and things like that. I thought that that was a really interesting contradiction because Solaris is often compared to hell. It's
Hmm.
the hot, it's the chaos, and cold is a little bit more like rigid, you would think. That's what you think of when you think cold weather, you right? And the fact that it's so opposite, I think was so fun.
Yeah, I like that too. And I found it actually makes sense though at the end of the day. Like in that cold place where like you can't go outside or like do those kinds of things, you would have a lot more of that like, yeah, sex is just a thing we do, it's for fun, good times. Or like parties and all of that cool stuff that they did for Glacium versus in Solaris where it's like you're always battling that heat and they're gonna go out and you're gonna do more of that like outside activity or be very like secular, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
in the way you would live because like yeah, the more time you spend around other people, the hotter it's gonna be.
Um, and on the note of that world building, I have always loved YA fantasy and new adult fantasy. That was my bread and butter when I was in like middle school and high school. Um, there were so many books that just got me into reading, and man, do I wish that I picked up this series when I was 14.
Oh yeah.
Like,
Well, I don't know actually no, I can't lie. I read Game of Thrones when I was 14.
yeah,
It might
I
not be the maturity level for all 14-year-olds, but if you're an avid 14-year-old reader, you could definitely read this.
the first book at least I feel like I could have read when I was 14. I think the worst that gets into it is the reference to sex a couple of times and the use of swear words.
Yeah, I will say these are they are they are romance books in the same sense that any YA book is a romance
Yeah,
book,
yeah.
I would say. I think it gets a little bit more gratuitous with the sex
Okay.
later on, but not like
Crazy.
romance book
Yeah.
gratuitous with the sex.
And honestly, I hold an opinion on this. All parents are going to parent the way that they want to, but like there's a lot of 14-year-olds that are sexually active, and
Yeah.
I hold the opinion that they need better resources to share what sex is, how to have safe sex, what consent is, and things like that. Books can support with that. My health class at 14 sucked.
Oh yeah, mine was bad.
Sex education is terrible, especially because now that we're adults and we know teachers, they didn't want to be doing it either, and they didn't know how to do it, and they didn't know how to talk to kids and things like that. I think that these types of books can support with that. Obviously, like parent your kids how you want to. This might be a little bit of a stretch for a 14-year-old, but like 16 at the very
Oh,
least.
absolutely.
Yeah,
That's when I started.
yeah, yeah,
But yeah, 14, like depending on what your kid's reading, this would be par for the
yeah.
course.
Oh man, I wish I did.
But yeah, because I didn't read this until I think I read it in 2016 when it came out. So I would
Okay.
have been in my mid 20s.
Yeah, I would have been like 18 at that time.
Yeah, early 20s. And I loved it
Yeah,
so much.
yeah.
And I still love it. I definitely see some critiques for it. Like it's one of her first series she's ever written, so
Okay.
it like writing wise, not perfect. But like not bad.
No, and this is the only thing I've really, really struggled with the book, and it feels like it has more to do with me than anything else, is I am no longer an 18-year-old girl, and it is more and more difficult for me to relate to an 18-year-old girl than it was when I was 18. And that is just the reality of us reading young adult fantasies at this point.
Yeah, the amount of disbelief you had to suspend for a lot of these much more difficult. I think the only ones I'm not gonna sound like a horrible human for this, but there are quite a few like academy or like wide shoes books that
Mm-hmm.
I'll read for that demographic. But I also find at the end of the day, those authors aren't writing them. Like they're saying
Yeah,
they're 18, 22, 23. They're not writing them like they are.
no.
So it's fine because I like at the end of the day, I'm like this reads like a 35-year-old woman wrote it, and I can live with that.
Yeah. Well, because the writing did read as if it was an 18-year-old girl. It was on brand
Yeah.
for the point of view that we were getting with Olena. It was a little bit it just said it how it was. There was no subtext. And I find that as I age and as I continue to read more and more complex books, I am just the type of person who wants to continue to challenge myself in that way. When I got back into reading maybe 3 years ago, I took like probably a 4 year break of like reading heavily. I did start with YA fantasy. I started with like reading all of the Mortal Instrument books, and I read Throne of Glass and all of those books because I hadn't read for a long time and I was like re upping that muscle. And then as I started to evolve there, like I started Brandon Sanderson this last year, I started Pierce Brown books. I really want to get into things like The Wheel of Time, which are just challenging. Like they feel like textbooks sometimes,
Hmm.
and I really enjoy those books. And so now going back into a YA fantasy, that writing style is challenging for me to like relate to because I'm like, no, I want subtext. I want to think about these. I want to stop every chapter and like create predictions in my head, and I want to really think about what they were saying when they said that dialogue. Um, and I think that's just a result of me like growing as a reader. But even so, I had so much fun with this book. I really, really liked it.
It is what I have it as in my brain is it's one of my comfort reads. It's one of
Mm-hmm.
those things where like if I'm in a reading slump or I just want to listen to something, I'll throw this one on because
Mm-hmm.
I love the storyline. So much fun. I feel like some of the plots later in the book hit just as good the sixth time, the seventh time. And it's easy to follow. It's a good time. It's interesting enough that I come back to it on more than one occasion because why not?
Yeah, you might as well. And I think it's hard, especially since we've started this podcast and things like that, and I've been reading more romance. I've kind of been craving that like innocence that this book has, of an 18-year-old girl who comes from this, very strict and rigid world and life just in general. I won't give too much away with that, but and gets into a new world, and she's exploring and she's learning and she's seeing things she's never seen
Yeah.
before, like little things like snow and stuff. That was really fun and enlightening for me, and that kind of reminds me why I like that escapism. That's my escapism. Is just that fun fantasy, lighthearted romance, and new world that this girl is like growing up in. I really liked that aspect of it. And so, even though the writing was from the point of view of an 18-year-old and it was a little bit less developed than maybe some of the other stuff that I've been reading lately, I I still had such a fun time. I liked the character,
I love Alina. She's one of my favorite female main characters of all time, and she only gets better as the books go on.
and there's not a lot of them that we have positive things to say
I
about.
know. Actually, okay, so I did think about this more recently, and
Okay.
I gotta ruin Landon's book. Mia is awesome.
Oh,
That's the sister who's mute,
right.
doesn't speak. She's a badass.
Okay.
I love her.
Okay.
Unapologetically herself,
Love it.
talks down to him like he's an idiot when she's clearly not.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and her style is just so much fun because it's like goth princess where she's like, yeah, I'm wearing this like frilly all black with like my black nails, black makeup, and then she's got like a billion colorful ribbons in her hair.
Yeah.
And I really liked that. She's a really cool character. I actually
Okay.
really liked her. Don't even get me started on some of the other girls in this series,
I can imagine.
but Mia's awesome.
Yeah.
We'll
Yeah.
say that much.
Yeah. Historically, Daria and I don't have positive to things to say about female main characters, and so whenever we do, we will talk about it. We will
Yeah.
praise.
Praise them.
Yeah, and I kind of have been trying to figure out why I like Olena so much as of right now. I don't know what the character traits are that are drawing me to her.
I think in the first book is she's not afraid to be wrong.
Ooh, I like that.
I think that's one of the things. Like she's not that main character who's like bulldozing life.
Yeah.
Like she's like, okay, I'm in this new situation. I need to pause. I need to figure out what's going on. I need to learn. I need to adapt. And she's also like she's willing to stand up for herself, which I appreciated. but she's also willing to stand up for others.
Okay. I'm gonna add to that really quickly. She's also very lighthearted about it.
Yeah,
She makes these little sassy comments that shows her vulnerability. Like she's vulnerable in these situations.
yeah,
She
she's
doesn't know
freaking out.
everything. She's freaking out and she recognizes like she'll say something and everybody will laugh at her, but she leads into it. She's like, "Yeah, that's funny. I don't really know what sex is and I'm 18 because I wasn't given that." But I she's living into it and she creates friends because of it. She uses her vulnerability as this coat of armor, which I like. I think you're bang on with that.
Yeah, it was really interesting to see that because again, yeah, romance books like the female main characters are kind of just like they are whatever the plot needs them to be, whereas Alina is pretty. She is what she is, and you get what you get, and she's willing to be different and adjust, and she does. But yeah, you're gonna like her character more as she develops throughout the
Oh,
books too, because there's a lot of things that, and I again, really well done YA is really well done when your character matures throughout your books and you get to see like, oh, this was the thing you looked at in the past and you were fine with it because it's you were 18 years old. And then 2 years later you're like, "Wait. That's not how that's
preach.
supposed to work. I was wrong." Or I
Preach.
had blinders on or like whatever else.
YA fantasy does not work if you don't have good character growth.
Yeah, otherwise they're just children forever.
Books in general don't work if you don't have good character growth, but especially YA because you have such you have characters who are literally not adults or just getting into adult. Our growth is the fastest at that point. So if you have a character who's 17 or 18 years old and by the time that they're 24 they haven't changed, that is an issue. If they're still doing the same bullshit over and over again, that's an issue and it's not going to work out.
Yeah. So this one I think she learns a lot about herself, she learns about a lot about the world she lives in, and it really helps you be like, okay. And that does start in the first book and then just like kind of snowballs from there.
Yeah, and this book was so interesting. We'll share a little bit about like the characters from a spoiler-free lens. You have Olena, who is the main character, and like Daria said, it is from her perspective. This whole book, apparently the whole series as well. And Olena is the only person in Solaris who needs to wear a veil over her face, and that is done by her mother, who is the Tatum
Yeah, Queen
queen of Solaris.
or Tatuma. No, Tatum. She's the Tatuma. Yeah.
Yeah, she's the Tatuma because she is the daughter of the Tatum. So she needs to wear a veil over her face, and we do not know the reason why. And she also has a developed relationship with Kedrick, who is a prince of Glacium. And Kedrick is tasked because his brother is the king. He is tasked with the negotiations that happen for the year of the each revolution. And so he comes and they're kind of like star-crossed lovers, right? They have this really
Yeah.
cute little relationship. And the issues between the two worlds are reflected in their relationship, right? They are bound to secrecy. Kedrick is not even allowed to see her face. Nobody has ever seen her face, including herself.
Yeah. Which I think is a really important thing for this one because it's so cool because you will always like you have veiled characters in a lot of other books, but they always know why they're veiled.
Mm-hmm.
Or they know what they look like. Whereas Alina has no idea why she's wearing this veil. She has no idea what she looks like, and her mom has made sure that she is never taking that thing off.
Yeah, since she was a baby, she's had it on.
Yeah, and the only person who's seen her face is her mom. Everyone else is dead.
Yeah, yeah, and if they had seen her face, they died. And there's a lot of speculation around that, right? What I did find interesting is that she didn't really question it a lot as
No,
to why. But I think that that is a result of the way that her mother treated her.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
I also wouldn't question it. And I guess it's one of those things too. It's a learned behavior. If you're doing it from like, there's no point she remembers not wearing the veil.
Yeah.
So like, why would you take it off? And she's made sure her mom has removed like every reflective surface in any of the rotations they live in. Like, she couldn't even look at her face if she wanted to.
Yeah. Yeah. And with this book specifically, I'll talk about this book because obviously I haven't read the other three. I will be reading this series, though. This is something that I'm actually really excited to get into. Um, it was not that focused on the romance. Like, like you said, it's a romance novel in the way that YA is romance. It is on 18-year-olds' minds.
Yeah.
It is in their hormones and things like that. But the reason that I had wished that I had this book in my hands at that age is because almost every book that I picked up that was a fantasy novel at that age was either no romance at all or it was completely focused on the drama and the romance. So I think about the Mortal Instruments, which is like it has world building, but it's focused on like the naive relationships and romance and drama between the characters and like anytime something happens, it's like werewolf is with a vampire. How dare they? Or XYZ. Like it's all kind of romance focused. Or it was just completely not romance focused. And
Yeah. Like Harry Potter.
Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, which isn't really that age demographic, but I've read it then. Um, one of my favorite series was called The Knife of Never Letting Go, The Maze Runner,
Oh yeah.
right? Like those books were primarily like extremely masculine. And I was always a huge fan of those, but there was no romance in those ones. So what I really liked about this one is it was from a female perspective. It wasn't completely focused on the romance. That wasn't the only thing on her mind, even though it was. But her mind is on the politics. Her mind is on like her ambition and what she wants to do in life and where she's going. And she has a romantic partner at this time that has complications and has real life challenges, but it is not the sole focus.
Yeah. It is a tool used to drive the plot in the way it needs to go, but it's not like the cornerstone of this book in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. And I'm like, I was even talking about Lord of the Rings because I've read those books way too young. And now, as I'm aging, I'm learning a lot more about the lore behind Lord of the Rings, and it's so expansive. I would have never been able to understand all of that at the age of 14. This book is such an accessible amount of world building written in a very accessible way for that age group that would get you into those bigger world building fantasies. And I love it about it.
Yeah, I if someone was looking for book recommendations for their like young adult, I'd totally give them this and be
Yes.
like, here's the things you might want to know before you let your kid read this, but like go for it. I read
Mm-hmm.
way worse than this at that age. I promise I turned out fine.
Yeah, like if you are looking for like a couple trigger warnings ish, maybe for that demographic.
Yeah, there's a lot of swearing. It's
Yeah,
one of the things that they use to highlight the difference between the two worlds, whereas like Solaris doesn't have they have like terms of frustration and things like that, but they're not true swear words, whereas like Glacium uses our swear
yeah,
words and a lot of them. They're very I would liken it almost to like Viking culture.
yes.
Yeah.
That's what I pictured.
Yeah, they're very Viking. They're not quite like screwing on the table, but like they're about half an inch away from that.
Yeah, they're very like Fey realm. If you
Yeah.
read or watch a lot of books, as how the Fey work, it's like it's very polyamorous, it's very sex positive, and that kind of thing. And then there's some abuse trigger warnings as well. That I would say that you would want to be cautious of. But it is written in a way that it is progressive for a demographic of a late teen or young adult, um, that does a good job of explaining what it is and what's happening and why.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that too. I think it's also like I want to say excessive necessarily, but it's to a point where it's like very important to the plot of this
Yes.
book
Mm-hmm.
and adds a lot to her character and like why things are happening the way they are.
Yeah. And then I think the second piece, because we're talking about how it's a young adult, I think that if you are an adult who wants to get into reading or wants to get back into reading after taking an extended period of time off, this would be a perfect series for you to do that. It's a light read, it's an easy read,
Yeah.
but it's such a good introduction into fantasy.
Yeah, it's I the books are pretty short. I the hardcovers are thin. so thin.
One of my favorite things about this series is how short these books are.
Yeah, they're appropriately length for what they are.
So, as you said, that it was probably one big book that got split into four. It is so perfect that they got split into four. That first book is 217 pages.
Yeah, it's great. If you're just like, I need to read something before bed and I want to feel like I've accomplished something, you could probably have that done in 2 weeks.
Easily.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like we talk about Brandon Sanderson, who has the first book in the Stormlight Archives is 1,000 pages, the hardcover.
And they just keep getting bigger. Words of Radiance is like an extra 300 pages.
Yeah, like that is not an intro to fantasy or intro to
Oh
reading.
no.
And I talk to so many people about how they're really intimidated to get into reading, especially when they see like book talk culture or Instagram culture, or even just talk to me and they're like, "You've read how many books this year?" And I've read a lot less than you. There's a lot of intimidation with that because people will. One of my best friends actually, she had shared with me, like I'm really nervous to get into reading because I couldn't consider myself a reader. And I was like, well, do you read? Like, do you read the paper? Do you read like articles and things like that? And she was like, yeah. And I was like, well, then you're a reader. I was like, if you read 5 pages a night, you are reading. You are actively engaging in this practice. And the culture has gotten so far into like how many books can I read? I read all of these books and
Yeah.
like we choose to spend a lot of our time reading.
Oh yeah. I don't have children or any obligations outside of my 9 to 5 job.
Yeah.
And therefore, I spend all of that time reading or listening to audiobooks. I even listen to audiobooks while I work because I have a job where if I'm not in meetings, I'm doing data shit.
Yeah.
Like I'm just gonna listen to an audiobook while I
Right.
answer my team's messages. So like, yeah, I got nothing else going on, so I'm gonna read.
Yeah. And so I think there's a lot of intimidation when it comes to like how many books you can read. And if I don't read 50 books in a year, if I don't read 150 books in a year, then I'm not actually reading and it's not as much as other people. And it's like we choose to do this because we love it and we actually sacrifice other places in our lives
Oh yeah.
to read. Um, and what I think needs to be more of the culture and should be preached better is like read 10 pages before you go to bed. Get off your phones for screen time. Practice staying focused on a couple of pages. It is a skill to be able to do that. Um, and it's so good for you. So, these books, coming back to Fantasy of Frost, 217 pages is so accessible.
Yes.
It is so doable to do in a couple of weeks and to really feel accomplished and proud of yourself for finishing a book if you haven't read in a long time. And they're just so fun. I think it would be a really good series to get started with.
I'd recommend these over ACOTAR any day,
Yes.
personally.
Yes.
Like I know a lot of people get back into reading via ACOTAR.
Which is also an intimidating
It's
series. It's so
massive.
big.
Start with something like this. It's short. It all 4 books is gonna hit at like maybe 850, 900 pages.
And just once again, that is still shorter than this single book in this 10 book series.
Yeah. So like great starting
Yeah.
point. And then go read ACOTAR after. When you're like, okay, I feel like I can like absorb another big piece of world building and like a much longer series, or like you want to commit more. Like my boss just finished reading ACOTAR, or
Mm-hmm.
she's just about to finish reading it, and I think she started it a year ago. And I was
Oh,
like, go you, Kirsten.
yeah.
You're awesome.
I know. Well, and that's the thing, because I feel like I leaned on ACOTAR and Throne of Glass a lot too when people asked me for recommendations getting into fantasy, because that's just what's popular and that's what everybody really likes. So I think there's also this level of you read ACOTAR and then you get to participate in all the memes and the gifs and all of that stuff that comes with it because I think that's part of the fun. But I think I'll add this to my repertoire for people who are looking to get into fantasy.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great one.
Yeah.
So much fun. Do we want to dive into spoilers?
I think we dive into spoilers. Let's do it.
All right, so this is your warning. If you have not read Fantasy of Frost, which I highly doubt many of you have, because it has like 12,000 reviews on Goodreads, and none of them are my friends.
Wow.
Uh,
Go read it.
yeah, go read it and come back to us. Depending on who you are, it's going to take like 3 hours.
This is like a shameless plug to just download the episode. or like the episode and subscribe to us
Yeah.
so that you can find it easily when you come back.
Yeah. Save it. Favorite it. Come back after you finish it because this next portion is going to be fun. Gonna dive into two of my favorite tropes in literature.
All right.
And then we're going to talk about just some of the things that happen in fantasy books that I think are interesting, and every author kind of does them differently, and I'm really curious what opinions are.
Okay.
I'm going to start with my favorite trope of all time.
Let's hear it. I was trying to. You told me when I was on like chapter 11 or 12 that your favorite trope of all time was in this book, and I was trying to figure out
Figure
which
out what
one
it
it
was.
was, and I have absolutely no idea.
Okay. My favorite trope in any kind of book is a secret identity.
Ooh, okay.
I
Yeah, I like it.
They are my crack as far as books go, and this one just does it so well because it's not only is it a secret identity from the rest of the world, like everyone knows who she is. She's the princess. But like no one actually knows who she is because she's veiled the entire time and there's a reason why she's veiled and like
Nobody knows that reason.
not even she knows that reason.
The fact that she doesn't know it is so cool. Like she's always just been forced to wear this veil so nobody can see it. Her mother has removed every single mirror in
Bodies of water even.
to be able to see herself, and right from the get-go you have to speculate like why is her face hidden, and
And
it's so fun.
even when she gets that opportunity and she's in Glacium and she could find a mirror in any number of places, she still chooses not to show herself her own face.
Yeah, her mom really did a number on her. So her mom abused her basically and has just like hated her whole life, and has always told her that she is super ugly, um, and that's why she can't show her face. But like alone, that is not a good enough motivator for me. Like if it was just I'm
Yeah,
telling you you're ugly, you're not allowed to see your face, that's not good enough. But what is good enough is the fact that she is the Tatum, she is the queen, everybody is to listen to her. The people follow the Tatum and they're not willing to go against her, which, as a young woman growing up, seeing that, like, okay, I'm not allowed to do this. There is some reason that I'm not allowed to be seen.
yeah. And then it doesn't help that uh Joran,
Which one?
the the king,
Oh, King Joven.
Joven,
Well, it's spelled Joven. I think it's
Joven.
Joven.
Yeah, the audiobook narrator says it is Joven.
Oh, I like Joven better. I feel like if we're looking at Glacium being kind of Viking-esque, I
Yeah,
think it would be Joven.
Joven. I do too.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Anyway,
he doesn't help the situation either when he's like half drunk. He's like, no. Well, actually, no, he's fully drunk and he's like, that stays on.
yes.
Do not take that off. Because he takes it off of her like almost the first night.
Hmm.
She's there, sees her face, and is like, honey.
Well, and for her too, like she knows, and the consequences have been proven to her of what will happen because she showed her face to a young girl that she was playing with as a kid, and the second that she did, they took the girl and killed her.
Yeah.
So she has basically been shown that there are consequences to it. So she's absolutely terrified. And then as the reader, you're starting to speculate. Like what is it that she has on your face? And I'm playing mental gymnastics with myself. I'm like, is it some sort of power? Is there something on her face? It wasn't until King Joven saw her face that I was like that I predicted. Um,
But you did get it right.
I did get it right that she is probably showing some traits of her being um, Bruta,
Burma.
Burma, which is what they call people from Glacium. They're Burmas. So that's what I had thought because they have such a terrible power uh, dynamic between the two. And we didn't know anything about her father. We just knew that he died when she was really young.
Yeah, they like almost no talk about him.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it ends up being that, which is wild. And I feel like, especially with the way they've done this, is like the secret identity trope in this book. It's so far my favorite way it's been done, where it gets to pay off so many times because
I imagine.
she gets to see it, and then like he saw it, and then it just kind of snowballs from
Mm-hmm.
there.
Yep.
Because by the time we end this book, she's not wearing her veil anymore
Right.
because she's gone
Yeah.
off to do her little murder investigation.
Well, and that's like the fun thing I think about this too. It kind of gives me Aelin Galathinius vibes a little bit because in these worlds there's no phones. There's no like posting on Instagram like what you look like, a selfie or anything. There is literally two people living at the end of this book that have seen her face, which means she can run around Glacium as much as she
Yeah,
wants
she can do
with
whatever she
nobody
wants.
knowing that she has come from Solaris. Um, and that is super fun to me
Yeah,
because that's going to pay off over and over again as you go through the series.
yeah, no, and it sure does. It's just one of my favorite ways that trope has been used. I think another one, it's behind me. You can see it on screen. The Blackened Blade by Isla Davin
Okay.
has a similar version of this trope where she actually, it's a regression version of Secret Identity where she's like in a testing center 7 years in the future,
Mm-hmm.
or like in her present. It's 7 years ahead of when the rest of the book takes place. And it's in a fantasy world with like magic and all of that. And she gets sent back into her former self while she's at this like academy. I think she's like 17,
Okay.
18 in the book. But she goes back in time and is like just plopped into her body when she was that old in the exact same setting, same world, same everything. She's just mentally 7 years older. And you get to watch her like go through life again and like relive that and have the retrospective of 7 years of experience and like having
Oh,
all
interesting.
of that happen to her. And then see the way she chooses to like change her world and like she's also figure out why she was in this testing facility and all of that. And it was just I love it. And like the guys in the book that she's with, because that one's a white shoes, like they don't know this about her yet
Yeah.
by the end of that book. So it's just so interesting to watch that kind of like you know something, but no one else knows it. And I love that feeling you get when it's like, let's go.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm super excited for it. Um, and even the way that they portrayed Olena, uh, what I find in a lot of these young adult fantasies or just young adult romances in general, it's so focused on, like what they look like. It's, they have this color hair and their eyes are like big and blue and they have fair skin, um, freckles, like whatever. It didn't need to touch on that at all. And even her perception of the world, because of the veil, she couldn't see shit.
Yeah,
So it was a very different view of the world. You didn't get in-depth descriptions of what anybody looked like because from her perspective they were
a blob.
blobs or they were just outlines and she could kind of tell the way people looked from there, and I thought that that was an interesting way to focus on the actual characters and the actual world and the politics over just the way that everybody looked. But what I'm also really interested in is how that changes now that it's off, now that she's
Yeah.
not wearing the veil.
What does she see?
What does she see? What kind of person does she become? What do other people see in her? And how does that change the perception of them to her? I'm really excited to see how Kelly explores that.
Yeah, my favorite thing too was like, well, she was injured after those guards like beat the crap out of her, the mercenaries or whatever they were.
Mm-hmm.
And she didn't have the veil on, and Joven walks in and he's like, "You roll your eyes like a lot." And
Yes.
she forgets she's not wearing the veil and she's never had to guard her facial expressions before. This is what I miss about Mass during COVID too. Where like she's so expressive with her face in every situation because she didn't have to worry about people seeing it. So she could roll her eyes when you made a stupid comment or like pull faces or look shocked when she shouldn't have been because no one could see it.
Yeah. Well, and it just reminds me, like, I think of when I'm wearing sunglasses, like, how many people I'm just watching and
Yeah, just
staring at
staring them
because I
down.
can. Um, Dude, I would be so bad for that. I already struggle to keep my facial expressions.
Neutral.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'd be so bad. And like she's 18. That's a really ingrained learned behavior at this point that would be so difficult to break.
I already think about the amount of times that I have to go off camera and Zoom sometimes.
Oh yeah.
You're just in one of those meetings.
Yeah, and you're like, no.
I've had my boss like message me on the side being like, contain your facial expressions.
Yeah.
So that's going to be interesting because that's always something that she's obviously struggling with.
Yeah, and like you can just read the whole world on her
Uh
face.
huh.
Which and she's gonna learn to figure that out or just be
Yeah.
really willing to own it.
She kind of gives me those vibes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so that was your first favorite trope. What are other ones?
My second favorite one, culture clash.
Mm,
I really enjoy that one because I just think it's so interesting to see the different ways authors will tackle it. Because I think in the real world, culture clash is one of the biggest pieces that causes tension in a lot of
for
relationships,
sure.
individual, nations, all of that. Like, I think back to my last ex, like, that was not a good time because culture
Yeah.
clash was so
Uh-huh.
bad because I'm not from a conservative white family at all.
Yeah, that was yeah, it wasn't good.
So like my opinions on things were really different, or like the way I would approach a situation was really different, and
Mm-hmm.
it was just so interesting to see the way she tackled that and having Alina's perception on like what fights were worth having.
Totally.
And the other way around too, because the Glacium delegates were in Solaris and they were like bumbling idiots the whole way through from their perspective, and like people were laughing at them.
Yeah, and I think one of my favorite parts of that is always the dialogue because and that's where I think it's so good for me that it's not so focused on the romance because the dialogue of how the two nations need to talk to each other and like even King Yovan and Olina's relationship and how they're like going back and forth and how they have to kind of figure out how to have conversations with each other and build that relationship. Um, it's all very, very fun. I really like it.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite parts with it too was the Salati, the name for the people who live in Solaris, way of like asking questions and approaching conversations where like it's considered really rude to ask a question outright. So you have to like make a statement that leaves room for someone to come in and contradict you or
Yeah.
correct you or say their opinion in some way, shape, or form, but like you cannot ask a question.
Or the little practices that Solaris has where you are not allowed to use their shortened name. Uh, like Olina, so everybody in Solaris has an O in front of their name, and the only people who are allowed to use their shortened name are if it's a loved one or they're very close, or if you're married. So Olina's shortened name is Lena, just
Mhm.
drop the O, but only so many people allow that, and she has to give consent for them to call her Lena. Um, and it's considered disrespectful if you do it without. Like there was that whole situation with Kedrick in the lunch hall where he accidentally called her Lena in front of everybody, but it was a secret. And then everybody was super shocked, and that was just like so outright.
Yeah, and her internal dialogue of like, this will follow me to the day I die. Like, see, people will talk about the fact that he just called me Lena until the day I die.
Yeah. So it's very avoidant. I would say like that whole culture is extremely avoidant. Like she's not allowed to train. I picture a lot of their clothing just being very like covered up. You know, Alina has all of her clothes and they go down to her wrists, so only her hands are visible and all of that stuff. It's very put together.
Yeah, I imagined it being like a very Middle Eastern desert dwelling style of
Yeah,
clothing where it's like you're wearing those extra layers because there becomes a point where they actually cool you down, and yeah, like the robes and like the
yeah,
almost toga style.
yeah,
I think they described it a couple times.
yeah.
And I just have such a hard time imagining it because it sounds horrible to wear personally. And I just couldn't do it. But yeah, it was just such an interesting thing. And then you go over to Glacium where they're barely wearing anything at their parties,
Yeah.
and
They have their fairy juice that makes you all wonky, which I think was just alcohol, unless it
it was
was.
just alcohol.
Um, but they also, in a lot of novels, they do kind of like a fairy drink that makes you like hallucinate and stuff. Like that's more of maybe a mushrooms type equivalent, so it also might be something closer to that.
Yeah, I don't know what they were fermenting into that,
Yeah, but it was something sort of magical.
which was
What
an interesting one in this book because there is no magic system in this
I
series.
okay, that was gonna be my next question because beyond the fact that the world building was very good, beyond that, I don't know what else is happening. I don't know what the aging system is like in this book. I don't know um, what kind of magic is involved, but it seems like there isn't really none.
There isn't really any, which is
Okay.
one of the reasons why I really like this as a fantasy novel because it's fantasy in the respect that like there is some inherent magic obviously
Yeah.
because like they're in disc worlds that
Yeah.
one's hot and one's cold, and like there's light sources and sun and everything, but at the end of the day, like they're not throwing fireballs or freezing things themselves. Like there's
Yeah.
no magic system itself. But like you know there's something.
Yeah, there's some sort of different power, and what it could be chalked up to is kind of like a Hunger Games situation where the technology is just different, and the actual structure of the world is just different. That could definitely be true. Um, but I also think, especially with YA fantasies, it's almost best just to not think about it too much.
Yeah, and I kind of like that with this one where I was like, you know what, cool. You live on two discs that rotate near each other, and there's little thingies that attach you, and then sold.
Yeah.
That's all I need. Thanks.
Yeah, I get really caught up in explaining everything. Um, so I want to know like how did you explain all of it? I want it to be almost science fiction, which is a silly expectation for me to have with fantasy, but whatever. I want to be able to explain all of the things. So I'm thinking from like a genetic standpoint, how is it that like um the Brumas have only blue eyes, and then the Solaris have like all these different colored eyes and all that stuff. Like I'm thinking from that perspective, like explain it all to me. But I think with YA fantasy novels, it's just best to allow the fantasy world to be as it is and just enjoy the vibes that it gives you.
Yeah, and I think this book delivers really well on that.
Yeah. Anyways, nailed the prediction.
Yes, you did.
I texted Daria right when King Yovan, or I sent her a video message right when King Yovan took off her mask and was like, "You need to keep this on." Um, and at that point, I had already been kind of speculating it's got to be some sort of power or some sort of information that would like be the key to uniting these two worlds or something like that, or information that would do so. And so as soon as he saw them, I was like, there's got to be something on her face, like a feature of some sort, that she's actually Bruma. And we don't know at the end of this book like whether it was that she was stolen at a very young age, or her mother was with a Bruma, or like we don't know,
Yeah,
but I did predict it right.
you
Proud of
did.
myself for that one.
Yeah, no, you got that one bang on. I I at that point too, like it's a YA novel. That's pretty.
You know that there is a reason beyond her being ugly
Yeah,
that you
there's
can't show your face. You can kind of figure it out.
it's not that deep.
Yeah.
I just like that still no one knows what she looks like or who she is at the end of the day,
Yeah.
and that's just gonna keep paying off constantly.
Man, I was so bummed when she was running away though, because I know why it had to happen. Like I know she had to get out of, the King Yovin's like situation and stuff at the end of the book, and she wanted to go somewhere else. But I was like, I like this crew. I like the delegates. I like her relationship with the delegates. I like
It's
her
so
girl best
good.
friends. Um, her relationship with King Yovan is kind of weird.
Yeah, that one has to develop quite a bit,
Like,
and it does.
yeah, because he's creepy a little bit, but also he shows signs of, like, hope to be her friend. Like, you can tell he cares about her and he wants something to happen there, but also, like, he's a little bit mean.
Yeah, he's an asshole.
Yeah.
He's grumpy incarnate in
Yeah.
this one. But like honestly, rightfully so. They showed up without his brother, um, with her instead.
He's a bit of out of control.
Yeah,
He
and
doesn't have a hold on his temper.
he's got a lot of growth to do and
Yeah.
shit to figure out. And don't worry, she makes sure he does.
Good. But I was like, I want her to stay with them the whole time. And as soon as I found out she was running away, I was like, don't leave the fucking dog.
I know,
Are
and the
you.
puppy.
You're leaving the puppy? The little dog that you named Cora and learned that it was a puppy, and you trained her and she was perfect, and then she bit King Yovan, and now you're just leaving her?
Yeah.
How fucking dare you? And so, anyways, I was butthurt by that. But then the second that she was about to get over the wall, and then she killed the 5 thugs who were coming, and then she meets this other girl who was like, I'll hire you for fighting, I was like, fucking count me in.
Oh yeah.
We're going Aylin part 2. I'm in for this.
This yeah, that part honestly when she leaves is probably book 2 and 3 are my favorite
Okay.
just because of the way she gets to develop as a person in them, because she does get away from that safety at the end of the book of her friends. And like at the end of the day, it's still a court. It's
Yeah.
still super isolating, super like bubble wrap.
Yep.
She did get beat up, but she got beat up at home too.
Yeah.
So same difference
Yeah.
as far as her world is concerned.
And she's about to become this badass. She made some enemies. Like, she's always been in this bubble growing up. She wasn't, ruffling any feathers. She was dating Kedrick, but they kept it so under wraps. And she just took the beating from her mom because she had to. And then she moves over to Glacium, and then she meets all these friends, and now she's left them. She's abandoning them. She's kind of like adding to this lore that she has about herself. Like, the delegates are going to be pissed. King Yovin's going to be pissed.
Oh yeah.
She's going to have to repair those relationships, and she's going to have to figure out how to do that, especially if her goal is to bring these two worlds together somehow. So she's going to have to go through something in the second book where she just becomes a total badass. She knows how to fight. She got trained. And I'm really excited to see like what kind of trials she goes through.
Yeah, because she's got a lot of growing to do at the end of the day. Like, this will be her first time in the actual world
Yeah.
seeing what the average person lives like, because she's never had to see that
Yeah.
in reality.
Yeah.
So, yeah, her character growth, I think, so well done over the 4 books. And she is very strong. She is really good at fighting. She's not infallible with it, which I really appreciate.
Yeah.
Like, this gets explored more in the second book because obviously she's about to go join a fighting ring. But they kind of justify that one a little bit more. Like, she's again well above average. She's trained by the best in her
Mm-hmm.
kingdom world to do it. And I appreciate the fact that we acknowledge that she's trained to fight in a way that takes advantage of her size. Because I
Yes.
hate that so much in fantasy novels where they're like, the prim, proper 13-year-old can fight like she's a 6'7"
Yeah.
monster of a man.
She's 4'8". She's a buck 20.
Yeah.
She picks up the man and chucks him across the room. Like, get fucked.
Yeah. Whereas, like, you learn she's more precise with her fighting. She knows which areas to hit to cause the most damage. She knows how to throw someone off balance, how to use her size when she's grabbed to her advantage. So, like, I like this more than some fantasy books where I'm like, there's no way you're doing that.
Yeah. No, it feels accurate to where it needs to be. The important stuff is covered. It is super fun. It's like a cool character arc that I'm invested in and interested in. And at the very beginning, when I started reading it too, especially knowing that Kedrick and her's relationship was already so developed, I was like, I don't think this is Endgame in some way, shape, or form because it usually isn't, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's tropey in that. If he's saying I love you on page 13, then chances are that relationship's not going to last for 4 books. That's just the reality of it.
Yeah.
So when he died, I was like, that checks out. I'm bummed because we liked Kedrick,
Yeah,
but
Kedrick was a sweetheart.
like I knew she was going to go through a trial of losing him in some fashion.
Yeah.
But again, like, this is just such a good introduction to fantasy in that way,
Yeah, because,
right?
like, there's not a lot about to happen in these books that's, like, super, super shocking.
No, and it's also not very action packed in this one.
No.
And I don't know if it gets there, but it was very focused on her character. It was very focused on this kind of, like, unveiling of her identity and her figuring out who she is, because she just genuinely has no idea who she is and why she's been, covered up her whole life and stuff. And she's a very kind person and very selfless, but also, like, doesn't know who she is and hasn't had a chance to develop that. So I think that exploration is what made it so good.
Yep. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think as the books go, they do get more action packed. There's a lot more tension, fighting. Obviously, there's like a lot of things that happen at the end of this book where someone's in trouble, namely her.
Yep.
And then also she's going off to fight in underground rings. And I will say my favorite characters in the book come from the underground fighting rings. They're fun.
Oh, I imagine so.
They're great.
Yeah.
Uh and they're just watching, yeah, as like obviously like her friends from the court have to like navigate what happens with her, and she's off doing her own thing, and then they're upset and there's all these other people, and it just, yeah, it's a really interesting, and the culture clash also pays off more than once. I'll say that.
I believe it. The only thing that like I'm butthurt about, but I understand why it doesn't, and it also contradicts everything I've been saying, is that I almost want it to be a multi POV now that they're split up. Because now we've had her in three different places. We've had her in Solaris, we've had her in Glacium with the delegates and the king, and now we have her going to an underground fight club. I'm like, I want to know what's happening everywhere. Um,
Yeah.
and that is just the nature of the type of fantasy that I like to read and the world building that I like, but I have to remember that this is an intro level fantasy novel. I will get the payoff for like understanding what's happening. I trust this author that they'll kind of bring me back up to speed about the things that have been happening. But that's just my selfish. Like I just want everything. I want it all.
No, totally fair. And I think she does do a good job of it eventually, like
Okay.
bringing them all back into the same
Yeah.
conversation and like catching you up on what's happened. And then also like pushing it forward with that.
Yeah.
Very fun.
Okay. Good to know.
Okay, I have one more thing because and this is going to be a callback to last episode a little bit. Because I read through some of the lower reviews for this book. There are not many. This book is
Yeah.
a 4.19 rating on Goodreads with over 12,000 reviews. There's not a lot of one stars
No.
for this, especially one stars with actual text.
Yeah.
A lot of things you brought up were mentioned in them as like downfalls that we thought were really good for an entry level
Oh,
YA book.
interesting.
People just going in with expectations for something I don't think it is.
Okay.
That's totally fair. One thing that came up, I think more than once, and I was reading it and I like maybe I have the blinders on from reading It Ends With Us. But there were a decent number of people. I say decent. I read like there were I could only find like 3 or 4 reviews that mentioned this.
Right.
Where they were like, "This is just romanticizing domestic violence," and I was like, "I'm sorry, what?" Which is why I got upset in the last episode, being like, people need to understand that like you can bad things happen.
Yeah, I think we are misplacing the word romanticizing with reality
Yeah,
because romanticizing is saying that like this is something that you should want and this is something that you would hope would
yeah.
happen to
Or is
you.
making it one of the redeeming qualities of a character.
Uh-huh. Um that's not what's happening in it ends with us at all, and
No.
that's definitely not what's happening here. It's just explaining that like hey, these are things that people experience growing up. Um But what I will say on that topic is like when I was younger and I watched these things of like the hero arc or um like people who are great at things, you see them overcome a lot of trial and tribulations. And what I think can happen in those scenarios is I hope something awful happens to me so that I can like victimize myself into overcoming something, and I can see that maybe that's where they're pulling it from. I think it's incorrect. I don't think we're romanticizing it. I think that that is a feeling of people seeing somebody overcome something and achieving something so great that people are like, oh, I want to achieve, I want to overcome, and they are misplacing the reasons that those people actually become great.
Yeah. Which is drive
Yeah,
and
exactly.
willingness. And you don't really get to be great without overcoming things along the way. Not necessarily things like this, but like there's always hurdles. No one
Yeah,
just like walks into greatness. It's usually an uphill battle of some kind.
yeah,
And I think people that have to overcome these things from their childhoods have a leg up on the average person because they've already had to deal with really difficult situations and they're less likely to come into really difficult situations as an adult and be like, okay, well, we'll just end it here and
yeah,
like I'll go back to being comfortable.
yeah.
I think it's that growing up in a place of discomfort really helps you
It
be
does,
in uncomfortable situations as an adult.
it does, but it also takes so much away from you.
Yeah.
And that's what people don't understand is that this is just a reality conversation. It's not a romanticization. Like,
Yeah.
I don't even know if I said that word right.
I don't know
Both of
how you
us
say
have
that word.
either butchered it or got it right, and we're both calling it out. So whatever. But um, yeah, I think we are replacing reality with romanticizing.
Yeah, because I think one of the comments on one of the 1 star reviews that had mentioned it was like, this happens to real people, right? Like, even to this degree, this happens to real people.
Yes.
And you can't just keep and no one's saying it's a good thing anywhere in these
No.
books. Even when Joven like kind of gives her a little bit of a push against the wall, like that's also acknowledged at the time, being like, hey, you need to not do that.
Fantasy novels bring in real life scenarios. That is the reason that we like them. Because real life people, their feelings, their emotions, their actions, their complications, those same things get brought into incredible world building and different worlds and different stakes and all of those things. But the reason that we relate to them and like them are because real life gets filtered into them.
Yeah. Because you have to be able to relate to them in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah,
Even if they're in fantastical worlds where things are upside down and sideways, like you still need to be able to be like, oh yeah, I've done that before, or I've felt that feeling, or I've experienced that, or I
yeah,
know someone who's gone through this.
yeah. I don't I don't think that the author portrayed the abuse that was taking place during the novel as like a this is a beautiful thing of like,
Yeah,
you
one of
know?
the other things I saw someone mention, and I was like, I wish I had grown up as sheltered as you, because to have this take is a privilege that I don't think you understand it is. But the person that wrote the review said something along the lines of like, and then she would just wake up and be fine and go on about her day. And I was like, yeah, what else is she gonna do?
Right.
Is she gonna throw a tantrum every time she gets beat by her mom on a, like a weekly basis? Is she gonna have like eventually you just that's your life. That's
Yeah.
your day. You're not gonna get up and throw things across the room or be upset or cry yourself to sleep every night because of it. You're just that just becomes your reality.
But also, who's to say she didn't when she was younger? Like, we are
Yeah.
getting a 17 to 8, we're getting a 17 to 18-year-old girl in this book, and it was true to her character. This is the type of person that she became as a result of the abuse, and I think that it was not a stretch to get there, right? Like,
No.
she had used coping mechanisms. She had her brother who was very close with her help her through these things, and she put a mask on, similar to how her veil has been on for forever, and she like got up and she moved on every day, and she tried to like contain her shame and tried to like put on a brave face and every day. That was true to the character, and how she developed it.
Yeah. And I think it was just lost on some people, which fair.
Yep.
But we should live in a world where it was lost on everyone,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
then no one would have to go through that
Yeah.
or have those experiences. But it was a really interesting thing to give a book a 1 star for.
Totally.
But I was like, okay, sure.
Yeah.
Still one of the more higher rated books we've read
Yes.
by like a long shot,
Yes.
even for the number of reviews.
I think this is our best get swapped yet. I think it's our most successful one.
Yeah. We'll just put it out there. The next ones we have planned are probably. Well, is Manacle to get swapped?
I think it is.
Oh yeah, that should be interesting.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
All right,
Yeah.
anything else?
No, I'm really excited to get into the rest of the series. It's not going to take very long either. They're all so short.
Yeah, honestly, like less than a week probably,
Yeah, I'm excited.
with minimal commitment.
Literally. Oh my gosh.
All right, well, we'll call it there for this episode of Get Swapped. If you do read Fantasy of Frost, please let us know what you think about it. I really hope we've inspired at least a couple people to read this and talk about it because it's such a good book. It was published in 2016, and I think it deserves way more hype than it got back then and still has to this day. I've actually posted reviews about this whole series on my own TikTok page before.
Mm.
You want to hit those up, you can too. I also show off all these hardcovers that I spent way too much money on and have no regrets. But that's a wrap from us. We'll see you again in 2 weeks. You can find the podcast on social media under Whimsically Wicked. It's on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube.
Yeah.
And then you can find me on social media as Daria Can Read on Goodreads, Instagram, and TikTok.
And I'm on the same platforms as Haylee Johnson with a fancy little underscore. Give us a like, subscribe to us on YouTube, download our episodes on Spotify or Apple. Means a lot to us, and thank you so much.
Bye!